The fact that the meeting was small meant that we had a lot of responsibility. I mean, we became presiding clerk or assistant clerk, more often treasurer. I mean, we were really involved, and we were made. The meeting had been made had been recognized as a worship group, Madison Friends Worship Group, in 1937.
Oh, wait, let me get the camera rolling here.
Okay.
And I'll give Dick a cue, and then Dick, see if you can ask that question.
Or was it the Second World War was brewing, of course, and you know, coming to meeting was coming to an oasis, a sanctuary of people who you could talk with and get some courage, and of course the silence, the worship gave us strength to live in those times. Yeah, that's one reason it was so nice to walk into that little meeting. It was a heaven on earth in a sense, as I look back on.
I'm very interested in your own thought processes that led you toward conscientious objection.
Well, conscientious objection came natural to me. My father, though he was too old to be involved in the draft. You see, he was too old when the First World War came. Still, he was a pacifist. His writings were pacifist, and he was chairman of the Friends Peace Committee of the whole country. And he was editor for 10 years of the Messenger of Peace, which was a little magazine put out by Indiana Yearly Meeting. So I knew, I mean, I felt identified with that position. And I'm not sure that if I had been in I don't know that if I'd been in a family that had no connection with Quakerism or any such tradition, that I would have been anything but a person in the military. I don't know that I would have had to, I can't say that for sure, because I was a real shy person. And as a matter of course, I presumed that I would be a conscientious objector, and I went through all the requirements. I was perhaps the only conscientious objector from the program meeting in Richmond, Indiana, which had 700 members, and the draft board chairman in Richmond, Indiana, was a member of our meeting, whom we practically never saw at the church. And he remarked to me, "Why, nobody from our church is going to be a conscientious objector," but then he had to withdraw that statement when I proceeded. Obstruction was not put in my way. Again, you see, the conscientious objector camp program was prepared by very thoughtful friends who went to the powers that be in Washington, D.C. as the clouds of war were brewing and said, "Look, this country did a disreputable job of conscientious objectors during First World War and treated them like criminals, and that's not the American way." And so a bill, as you know, was passed to set up a work camp program for conscientious objectors, sponsored by Friends, Mennonites, and Brethren. So I was lucky to be in such a fine program, which of course evaporated after the Second World War was over. It wasn't a permanent thing.
So were most of the campers, if you want to use the word, in the work camps from those traditions?
No, I have a book. I'm going to be talking at a local high school tomorrow. They invite me out at the Monona High School every year, or somebody from this meeting, and I'll be taking with me the directory of all the men who worked in the civilian public service camps during the Second World War. There are 12,000 names in there, and they're from all kinds of churches. Must be 200 or 300 different kinds of religious groups, some of which you never heard of, as well as people who are quite unchurched, but whose faith has fitted the legal requirements that you have a belief in God, or a God or something equivalent to a God who tells you that you cannot participate in warfare. It's just amazing that people came out of all kinds of backgrounds, and there were farmers and carpenters, and salesmen, truck drivers, PhDs, all kinds of people.
The work in establishing the alternative work camps, notwithstanding, it still must have been a fairly grave decision on your part.
It was a grave decision because you were looked at askance as well as Senator Starnes, who put through the amendment to the Selective Service Bill to prevent any conscientious objectors from being allowed to go overseas and do significant work overseas. As he said, a conscientious objector is a traitor. In my book, something wrong with that. Under the war hysteria, well, in every war, there's that pressure on anybody who's not willing to fight with violence. Pressure on them to be ostracized.
So is it as a position from the camps then that you came to Madison, or?
No, see, I came up here in 1938 to work on a PhD. I left Westtown School because I realized that if I was going to be a college professor and I wanted to be like my father and my mother, I had to have that union card called a PhD. Also, I wanted to know, I wanted to learn about the subject. So I resigned from Westtown and came in 1938 to this university. But the draft didn't come in until the next year, I think it was. And I was left alone until 1944. I was not actually tapped on the shoulder by Uncle Sam to go to one of the camps until 1944, which is one year before the war ended, though nobody knew that at the time. So I left Madison, but I finished my PhD in 43, so I left Madison. Let's see. Let me put it this way. I came here in 1938. In 1940, my father died, so I went to Earlham and taught for a year and married Agnes. Used that year in getting better acquainted with her, and then came back to work on the PhD in 41. Then left here with a degree in 43. Taught at Earlham a year, 44. Was in camp 2 years. Came back in 46. By that time, the university had invited me back. So there were a few years there when I was not in Madison.
Were there any others in the small group that worshipped here at the time that for whom conscientious objection was an issue?
I don't remember any young people then, but after the war, ex-conscientious objectors, or honorably discharged conscientious objectors, certainly came to the meeting. Ivan Bean came out of prison. He was an absolutist, and he's been here ever since. And a number of graduate students came who had been in conscientious objector camps in various departments of the university, and found the meeting a most welcome home.
My sense of the spread of Quakerism in the country is not very complete, but I sort of have the feeling that in the 30s, Quakerism existed around the country in little enclaves, and that what was happening in Madison was a little bit different than that. Pete asked if you felt like pioneers in establishing Quakerism in Madison.
Well, in the Midwest and the West, as I was remarking before, the revivalist movement in the late 1800s had converted unprogrammed meetings to Quaker churches, programmed churches. But then there was the reestablishment of little unprogrammed meetings near colleges and universities. Seekers coming to get academic training were establishing unprogrammed meetings. They felt that's the real experience that Quakerism offers. Having a program meeting is not a new invention. Not that I wouldn't say that, of course, an unprogrammed sitting in group meditation is entirely of course, it's not an invention of the Quaker Friends, the Society of Friends, but there's a certain quality about a Quaker meeting that is unique. So it's around these campuses that these new meetings began. And after the Second World War, they became were appearing in at University of Minnesota, University here at Madison, and at various college campuses around those bigger universities. And Illinois Yearly Meeting, which had been declining in numbers because it's down in northern Illinois, in a cornfield. It had been declining in numbers because of the decline in number of farm folk anyway. And Illinois Yearly Meeting was a nursery, such a valuable group for us little people from little meetings to go to get a sense of the momentum of this simple kind of association and friends meetings that had been going on in northern Illinois for a century. And of course the yearly meeting was absolutely delighted to see this new population of friends. And our little meetings steadily grew till we outgrew Illinois Yearly Meeting.
What would you say were the drawing card, if you will, for growth in the meeting during the early ages? Do you have a feel for that?
Oh, people were drawn to, more and more people were drawn to the meeting because of, as I said, the two things, the work of the American Friends Service Committee in practicing what Friends believed as peace and service, and then the unprogrammed style of meeting, which we sat together and felt gave the spiritual part of us a chance, not in a hurried or a regimented way, to unfold and to share in that unfolding. That's a pretty exciting thing. So people were drawn by that, and then we went down once a year to Illinois Yearly Meeting in that old meeting house, big old meeting house with the partitions no longer used. They had been used in the 1800s to separate the men's business meeting from the women's business meeting. It was therefore it was a meeting house with a lot of character to it, personality to it, and the older friends in that community still just radiated this depth of character, and they shared it with us. And that was an important place to go once a year, and our children just loved it.
I gather that there was a period of time before the Madison Monthly Meeting became an official.
It became official
within Quakerism, where there was an informal worship group in the Quaker style.
It began. They tell us it began in the 1920s as an informal group which gathered in homes and read. They'd sit and read. It was kind of worship sharing, what we call worship sharing now. Somebody would read from the Friends Intelligencer or some other Quaker periodical or devotional literature, and they'd sit in quiet for a while. It was more like worship sharing than what we consider meeting for worship, in which you put this written material aside and just let the Spirit work. But then by 1937, as I said, that was recognized as a worship group. And there wasn't this worship sharing approach. It was the sitting in quiet. Then in 1945, we were recognized as a monthly meeting, which meant we could be considered an official meeting, in a quarterly meeting, and then in a yearly meeting. it was nice. It was nice to be a pioneer, as it were, in a little group. To go through the growing pains. Of course, it meant that you had responsibility, and you just couldn't wake up first day morning and say, "I don't feel like going," and I won't be missed. I don't think. you knew you would be missed, and you'd miss the group. But it was, although it carried a lot of responsibility, it was exciting to be in a small meeting that had a lot of flexibility to take up challenges and to carry on things and invent new ways of doing things.
So just for the record, since 1938, of the time that you've been here, have you ever missed a meeting for worship other than through illness or absence?
No, I don't know why I would want to. No, I don't think I've.
I'm not.
I don't generally try to fast. Of course, like everybody else in Friends meetings, I have participated in fasts of short fasts. That is going without food. But I think not going to meeting would be a kind of fasting I wouldn't want to do. Although we fast from words when we get there. Yeah, I think it's nice that my brother and I felt enthusiastic about Friends meetings instead of revolting and saying, we don't want to be like our parents, and as many children do, they just try to escape. Well, in a sense, though, we did. We moved from the program meetings to the unprogrammed. You can say, in a sense, we had a chance to feel we'd done something.
Was there a feeling of friction because of that?
No, there wasn't any feeling of friction, not at all. No. My father and mother had grown up in unprogrammed meetings, so they could understand why we found it interesting. But they were loyal to the pastoral system because that's what the majority of the people in their community had decided to do. And so they felt that they would stay with that programmed meeting approach.
Quakerism, in terms of theology, is notoriously difficult to pin down.
Yeah.
And I know that your background in Quakerism comes up through the family and may be difficult to pinpoint in terms of theological beliefs or things that attract you to Quakerism. But I know that you've mentioned experimenting with programmed traditions in your early period in Madison, and I know that you've experienced some of the Eastern traditions in terms of a spiritual leading or a spiritual journey.
Right.
I'm curious just how you would characterize your spiritual journey.
Well, I suppose my spiritual journey has been identifying with and following the spirit that I felt in my father and mother, and my aunts, my grandmother, and then my allegiance to people like Rufus Jones, the traveling ministers, who had the capacity to go across the country and speak in communities where there were unprogrammed or programmed meetings equally, with equal acceptance. Douglas Steer, and so then you see my gurus were professors at colleges, Friends colleges. Douglas Steer and Tom Kelly. And then people like Clarence Pickett, head of the American Friends Service Committee. And people like Muriel Lester, who was a leader in the Fellowship of Reconciliation. A.J. Musty. The great, what I consider the great leaders in the pacifist peacemaker movement in the country, not just in the Friends meetings, and then Mohandas Gandhi. I became not a very brave thing to do, ovo-lacto-vegetarian in conscientious objector camps. And for 25 years, I'm practically that right now, but I'm what I call flexible. When my wife was having difficulties with anorexia, I told her, I'll eat anything with you to keep you company. But Mahatma Gandhi certainly was somebody who, a great spirit who kept me hopeful, certainly through the Second World War. So then I've experimented with transcendental meditation, Buddhist meditation. But I keep coming back to the Friends Meeting for Worship as where I feel at home. I don't remember hearing, it's interesting, don't remember hearing my parents talk about Jesus. Mother was a person who would stand at the end of a program meeting for worship when there was an opportunity announced by the pastor and pray. And I don't remember that she emphasized Jesus, the name of Jesus. Neither did my father, who was a recorded Friends minister. They talked in terms of our Heavenly Father. I suppose I talk about the inner light or the presence. It doesn't seem to be much importance in hanging on to a particular term. But it's a spiritual experience. I think there's a slow ripening. What you love, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also, and there will be the nature of your being. That's the reason I think that attending Friends meetings for worship is just such a great thing, because you're saying to yourself, I want to be this, I want to be like this, I want this kind of spiritual nourishment. I know how to eat food. I'm a great eater of food at the table, but I want the spiritual quality. I just want to help myself as much as I want to be as open as possible. So I think it's great to have such meetings available. So my spiritual journey keeps on going. Nothing dramatic about it. Contrary to the declarations of the revivalists in the 1880s, who said, you just don't grow gradually. You've got to have a rebirth, sudden experience. You've got to be reborn. And I'm the midwife. Nothing sudden happened to me. I just grew like a plant. But it's nice to have the good soil of a meeting for worship to come to.
I've often felt, with a lot of friends, and you sometimes in particular, a particular talent at combining the spiritual, or maintaining a spiritual feeling about the work that you do.
I go.
Feeling for the soil?
I think, of course, that's what you're bound to have happen to you as you get in. If you invest yourself in this nourishment from a friend's meeting, then you're going to be uncomfortable if you're in some kind of work that doesn't have similar vibrations, isn't compatible with that. And I of course, I love the out of doors, and going out and soil surveying, jumping the fences and making soil maps and seeing what the pattern on the landscape was, and how vegetation and animals adjust to that pattern, and then how thoughtful people try to use the soils in such a way that they are not damaged. So I see that same sort of relationship between work and the spirit of the spiritual journey, and in so many people in the Friends meetings. I see that in the elders, and it would be interesting to have a discussion on that very topic. There were two young women who told me last first day that they had lost their jobs recently, and one of them said, I feel, she's just a recent attender, I just feel that this is the place where I can make the transition to whatever I need to do next under the proper auspices in the presence of the right vibrations.
A nurturing environment is what I kind of think of it.
Yeah, and it's just so a person is both lucky and at risk to come to a Friends meeting, because you're not going to be the same, but that's good. So you're lucky. Yeah, I just feel the presence of the people who, Mildred Ashman, Irma Duncan, the people who've died, Eugene Bartman and so forth. I feel their presence like they were here right now.
Speaking of transitions, do you have any favorite ones that you personal transitions that you've witnessed in the meeting that make interesting stories?
Well, the transition from meeting in homes to the student centers. That was really great. We'd drive to the student centers, bring in our little bookcase of pamphlets and whatnot for sale or for distribution, bring in our first day school materials, and we gathered them all up after an hour and a half or whatever, put them back in our cars and steal away. And we took pride in being house Quakers like that. We didn't have any more than the Amish, a building. And then we finally took the plunge and bought a building, had a building over here on Prospect in 1954. So that was a transition to having a building. So we felt comfortable about that, didn't feel too guilty about having our own building. And the children thought, well, that's great, but when our classmates at school say, there's my church, where's yours? Well, we could say, there it is. It isn't all that big, but we like it. And then the transition from that building to this one, in 82, I believe. This is a matter of buildings. I suppose one of the greatest things is to come to a business meeting. I think coming to a business meeting for worship to conduct business, is a pretty exciting experience. People don't vote. People don't take up sides and have competition and political bouts with each other. It's just, the business is done so harmoniously, and people are so teachable. It's just a great experience. And then one of the important things that we rejoice in is when a letter of application for membership is read. And it's just, these letters are just so moving. These people have reached the point where they say, well, I just have to admit, I belong here. I want to just tell you I'm a member of your family. Will you have me? And that's a transition that's so meaningful. And our meetings for worship for memorials, the way people just share, it's so spontaneous. At Lelia Bascom's memorial worship service, we were laughing. I think it's really so healthy. Nothing stilted. Everything is so genuine. And the meetings for worship for marriage. My young Dutch student who's with me now came to the last meeting for worship for marriage, and she just spent a semester in Spain and had attended marriages in the Catholic churches and thought they were so sterile, so routine, and the young couples getting married didn't look like they were happy at all. And she thought she came out of this meeting for marriage, meeting for worship for marriage, feeling That was really meaningful. Not only to the young couple, they were happy, but to the whole group. She was quite happy about what she experienced here. So that's an outsider's comment that just is good to hear. I don't know whether that's kind of transitions you were. Of course, the transitions of children growing up, and
Maybe transformation is
transformed into adults who still carry the most precious part of their childhood experience with them, and not necessarily continuing in friends meetings, but carrying out the spirit of Quakerism wherever they went, wherever they're going. That's something nice to observe. Well, we're all changing. We're all growing all the time. No one of us stays the same.
I've never asked you about this, but I know that it must have been a difficult transition for you, and that is, I know from reading the history that your wife Agnes is a co-activist in the
absolutely.
environment, and now I don't know much about her problems, but I know that she has.
Yeah, she's hospitalized for life apparently, and it's a real tragedy. But I can communicate with her. It's nothing like Alzheimer's. I can go and communicate with her, have really good conversations, and we're going to laugh and so forth. There's a part of her that's same. But the meeting is so supportive. None of us know what's going to happen to us the next hour, the next day, the next week. The meeting is so supportive, and there's nothing there's nothing that's unbearable with such an extended family. And in a sense, Agnes is attending the meetings in spirit, even though she cannot any longer act as an adult. Her adult behavior is impossible for her. Oh, so when I said that we are all the time changing, of course, I have to say it's not always for the better. That is, things happen to us that we didn't anticipate and didn't want to have happen, that are not positive.
I know your children occasionally attend here.
Yeah, our son Ben is in Washington, D.C. He's one of these young friends who does not attend meetings. He's very sentimental about meetings. Both our children went to Scattergood Friends boarding school and then went to Earlham College. But he's a folk dancer. He's a semi-professional folk dancer. He teaches Israeli dances and leads them at a Jewish community center, a large one in the D.C. area. And he just didn't have time for meeting. He, in a sense, is walking cheerfully, dancing cheerfully over the world. When I go, of course, I'm prejudiced. When I go to visit him and I'm sitting there when he's leading the dances, I almost cry because he does it so beautifully. The openness with which he does it is so beautiful. To me, he is dancing cheerfully over the world in a Quaker manner. So he doesn't have time to go to meetings for worship, rarely does. Our daughter Sarah finds spiritual growth in nature, and she also in service to other people. She's co-parenting a little boy, but she's been coming more this last year than ever before, returning. So we have quite a number of young people who you don't see around, who you might say are transmitters of the Quakers, what I call Quaker spirit.
Are there people throughout your association with Madison Monthly Meeting that newcomers like me should be appreciative that we might not otherwise hear about, that you could tell us about? I know that there's a tendency for people to come and be here for a while and then move on to some other place. And I know that they leave something of their spirit here.
Oh
It'd be
my
nice to
goodness,
know.
there's been a lot of people have been here at one time or another, have moved on. There's a woman by the name of Agnes Kuhn, who's about my age, who lives in Iowa City. She's a widow. She and her husband, Manfred Kuhn, who was a sociologist on extension and traveled all over the state of Wisconsin for many years. They were active in the early years of this meeting, Agnes and Manfred Kuhn, my goodness. So she's one of, then they went to Iowa City, and he died, and she's been their active person in that meeting. I don't know, I just right off, of course, the Grahams, Joe Graham and Bat Graham, Chester Graham, were such powers. He was clerk of Illinois Yearly Meeting a while. Joe Graham was very active in Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and in the YWCA work. Then they moved to Ludington, Michigan. He died just recently, age of 98 or something like that. Joe, his wife, is still living over there. The list of people would be a long one if I really collected my thoughts and went through the minutes. This meeting, of course, is a group through which many people have come and gone.
We'll take a break.
Okay. When we were teaching nonviolence at the Catholic Center.
Well, Jack, Tiffany, you and I were co-directors of the nonviolent course in nonviolence. It was held each year for 10 years, I think it was. And we had little mimeographed summaries of in some years, of the courses. And every year we held a course in nonviolence at a different religious center. One year it was held at the Friends House, another year a Congregational Student House, and so forth. I remember the year it was held at the Catholic Center, the Newman Center. Father Kuchera was there then, and I remember it was the first session. He was besieged by a number of young Catholic men who came and said, well, not all young either, who were saying, well, you know, you shouldn't be having this nonviolence course. They're commie front. They're not real America. I mean, we can't have our church be known as a place. And Father Kuchera, reading a calm voice, says, it's all right. It's all right. There's nothing wrong there. From the Quaker meeting.
Which year was this?
I don't know. I suppose it was during the Vietnam War, I imagine. Vietnam War. But in the McCarthy era, would that be? No, that'd be about the same. Anyhow, we put out a periodical called the Peace Times, and that was something that not everybody wanted to be known to be getting into their mailbox. People were so afraid. So we were, though it looks like quite a small effort now, we were doing something brave. And I remember that we would put up signs about a committee on to talk with people who were pacifists, who were thinking about conscientious objection on the university bulletin boards. And this got passed around in some of the bars in the city. And Agnes and I began getting phone calls, regular harassment phone calls at our home when the bars closed, 1 a.m. And nasty. And we're gonna get your kids and that kind of thing. So there was enough war fervor that some people of without too much discipline, were doing some things that even the military, of course, didn't want being done. They were harassing some of us.
We talked a little bit about World War II in the meeting house, so tell us a little more about Korea and Vietnam.
Well, at the time of the Vietnam War, the Korean War and the Vietnam War, attendance at our meetings for worship would increase to the point that not everybody could get in, and it was at that time that we.
Would you say mostly draft age people or all ages?
Well, I think it was mostly university students who were coming. There were some faculty too, and some townspeople. I think people were so traumatized, so unhappy about our country was involved in so much killing and destruction, and of course it's still true.
No, I mean, with Vietnam particularly.
Yeah, Vietnam particularly. That they were looking for some source of spiritual comfort or guidance or consolation, and so we set up a meeting on meeting for worship on the east side of Madison. It had some 20 people attending there to take some of the pressure off the meeting house, where the fire marshal said we could have only 40 and we would have up to 80 in that meeting room.
What period of time was that at the East Side meeting?
The East Side meeting lasted for almost 25 years, and we laid it down about 3 years ago. So we're going back into and that would take us back into the Vietnam period, I think.
What was it like having a smaller meeting away from the major?
That's right. It was there are a number of people who joined the meeting after attending for several years the East Side meeting, which was called the Yahara meeting after the Yahara River, and it was held in different homes. Each host and hostess would agree to have the meeting for a month, and then it would move to another place for a month, and it was held from 11:15 to 12:15. That way, if somebody wanted to bring their children to first day school here, they could leave here just before 11 when this meeting began, go across town and reach our meeting for worship 15 minutes later. And then we would phone from that meeting at 12:15 saying, well, what were the announcements? So that's a big meeting. And so it was a small meeting in homes, and there's a nice quality about a meeting in a home. And you just kind of feel like, well, you realize that ours is our portable religion. It doesn't have to have an Methodist. What do you want to mean? It doesn't have to have a building, and it doesn't have to have clergy. You just feel a kind of a sense of power in that. And so that when people, they thought it was kind of an honor to have the meeting at your home. And as I say, some people who joined here went through years of getting used to the Friends Meeting for Worship in the small group, and some of them say they wouldn't have been able, they would have probably turned tail and not stayed if they'd come to a meeting as big as this one here. They just would have been too shy.
What was the, why would you say that the need for the East Side satellite meeting ended?
I don't think the need ended. I think well, in a sense, it ended insofar as this building is so capacious. We can have 2 meetings in the morning, or we can even have 3 if we decide to. We'd have another meeting for worship if the pressure were great enough in the afternoon, late afternoon maybe. But also I think that we, in a sense, ran out of people who would be willing to say, sure, you can have it at my house for a month. When people retire, they don't tend to have as regular attachment to the city of Madison as they did before. They go off on trips, so they become less reliable in the sense of when you have when you're tied to a job in the city, you're likely to be here almost every weekend. And then their deaths take away some of our people that used to host those meetings. I, however, think that when our new directory comes out with all the addresses, we ought to locate where everybody lives, attenders, enthusiastic attenders as well as members, and see how we're geographically distributed as to our homes where we live, and see if it isn't possible to have some at least midweek meetings.
We spoke a little bit about the process of Madison Monthly Meeting growing and being sort of the offspring of larger Illinois groups. I get the sense, being a new attender of smaller groups around the Midwest, Wisconsin in particular, that look to Madison Meeting these days. Speak a little bit about that.
As being what they would like to have?
Yeah, and what they would like to have.
Yeah.
A sense of momentum and energy.
Yeah. Well, you see, we've grown slowly since 1937, 52 years. I think this is the normal growth. What happened, of course, when the revivalists came through in the late 1800s to meetings was that they brought in hundreds in Indiana, even thousands of new members. It was just too fast a bringing in of new people to be absorbed. And the Madison Meeting has been fortunate in its slow growth. It's been natural growth, like a tree, if you want to put it that way. And I think all these other meetings are slowly growing. But when you have a small meeting, you look, like as we used to look at the 57th Street meeting in Chicago with stars in our eyes. The friends there, many of whom are on the faculty at the University of Chicago. People who started up co-op groceries, people who did things in Chicago and were involved in the American Prince Service Committee and all that. They to us set the pattern of the ideal pattern. And of course they encouraged us. They were our grandfathers and grandmothers and parents, so to speak. And so I suppose Madison Meetings is sort of that position now. And we maybe could think about being willing to do some traveling ministry, to go out and in fact, Northern Yearly Meeting Advancement Committee asked Kathy and Stan White and me to do some of that traveling ministry, and we went up in November up the east side of Wisconsin. So Madison should take more responsibility for encouraging those meetings, going out and visiting them.
Tell us what you recall about some of the projects that have happened that have centered around meeting during the history of the meeting. Things like
Quaker
co-ops
Quaker housing,
Quaker housing.
which is I think a marvelous housing group, in which set up down there, designed by one of our own members, an architect, Nat Sample, and in which people with low incomes pay only a certain percentage of their income. It's really, and it has a good spirit down there in South Madison. And now there's a committee planning another housing project of a similar nature. Well, the meeting has been an enthusiastic backer of Scattergood School. We've had quite a number of our children go to Scattergood School, and Alney, the Barnesville, Ohio school, these old-timer schools, boarding high schools.
That's something that was brought up at a meeting. I can't remember exactly the occasion, but it's always seemed to me that the natural Quaker position should be that of a strong supporter of public education, and yet...
Absolutely. Well...
And yet Quaker schools is also a tradition.
Yeah, Quaker as other religious groups did, the Friends started before there were public schools, well funded by the state legislatures. Friends weren't waiting around for that to happen, so they, as other church groups did, started Quaker schools. And some of those turned into colleges and are still going. But most of those Quaker schools and academies were laid down, and the teachers moved over to the public schools and did just what you were saying. They supported the development and the improving the quality of public schools. And certainly Lilia Bascom always shook her head when some of us wanted to start a Friends school in Illinois or Wisconsin. We thought we ought to start one. And the community down at the Illinois Yearly Meeting, the community of farmers down there had no interest in all the work it would be to start a Friends school. So it was not possible to get enough enthusiasm there to start a school. So Scattergood School, which was never laid down, and Alney, which has not yet been laid down, though they're making noises about it, are the ones that have survived that we can support.
I gather, though, that there was a time that Madison Meeting was considering investing a lot of energy in it.
Well, yeah, we were wanting to do that so badly. We just thought that. And the friends at the Twin Cities in Minneapolis and St. Paul have succeeded in getting a school started, and it's been going about 3 years and has the first 3 grades. That is an enormous accomplishment because people feel that just as you go to a Catholic school, there's a Catholic school which I gave a program recently near Black Earth, near Cross Plains. Wonderful spirit there. The children go to the church for religious services, and so I have a really good feeling about the quality, the spiritual quality as well as the academic quality of that religious school. And that's the way with Friends schools. They felt that they taught Quakerism. They gave by the quality of the teachers and the meetings for worship. I think it's true that if you go to a Friends school, you have an extra opportunity to, whether you use it later in life or not, to grow spiritually and to see that as an alternative to the secular culture that spending and buying, amusing yourself culture around us.
Another project that I was fascinated with is the establishment of the student co-op.
Yeah. The
Friends co-op.
Co-op housing. There's a house, still called Friends House, which was a co-ed, as I recall, a co-ed housing venture at a time when the university hadn't yet allowed students to have such a co-ed house. But they figured, well, under Quaker auspices, it can work, and it did. It was I think this meeting has been amazing in its willingness, the energy to start so many things, and it never has really burned out. And I think we've never had conflicts of personality, or we've just been lucky with the quality of spirit and harmony and people working at it from the very beginning. I think that there's a tradition, a kind of a atmosphere that we're lucky to have in this meeting that encourages people to have enough energy that's not being wasted on conflict to put into various kinds of projects.
I know that during the time that I've been here, things seem to have gone extremely smoothly, but there were conflicts having to do with reaching consensus about same-sex marriage, and,
Right.
and the conflicts with attenders that are less than in the spirit of the meeting.
Yeah, that's right.
Particular conflicts that occurred in the meeting that you recall?
Right. The meeting is able to handle thus far problems that are natural human problems that have happened over the decades in Friends meetings all over the world. I don't think it's just unprogrammed meetings that are open to abuse by people who come in and prey upon them in one way or another, because it happens in programmed churches. It seems to me that every religious group is a target for somebody who's is a troubled person in some way or other.
Those are difficult issues to deal with, particularly when consensus is a standard way of
Yeah.
doing business.
Of course, consensus doesn't mean unanimity. It means willingness of the minority to say, well, we will not stand in the way. We won't obstruct. We don't agree, but we won't obstruct. But having to get that close an approach to unanimity means a lot of discussion, but it's the way to go, because then the decisions are strong and are stable.
I sense oftentimes a sense of wisdom coming out of those discussions too.
Right.
Sometimes it seems so simple.
Yeah.
The wisdom that comes should have been there from the beginning.
The question constantly is, well, what does God want us to do? If you want to use the word God or whatever you want to say, what is this great spiritual presence? How does it feel? And when you ask that kind of question, then you're likely to come up with the right decisions that you, as you look back later, say that was a way to handle that.
Francis, would you mind speaking about the meeting as a sort of a worldly community and how it serves the individual?
A worldly community. You mean it's
Earthly?
It's related to practice. It's a practical community,
Yeah.
and how it serves.
Yeah.
Well, of course, our meetings for worship are the basis of it all, and we come here not just as we know for the individual. That some people don't realize that. Some people will come in late, and this is so for 350 years this has happened. So it's not something that just struck us in our period of time. But some people will come in late and leave early, as if to say, "Well, I had other things to do. It was nice. Now I'm through." They go. But that isn't what the meetings for worship are. They are really a community of people coming on time and staying the full time, because there's this unseen presence there, and they don't want to miss anything. They want to get the full benefit. And so as you realize that, then you've got yourself a spiritual family that's a spiritual cooperative. It's got a lot of strength, and therefore it can be a real practical help. And so anybody can ask for a clearness committee on any subject. If they're having emotional problems, psychological problems, if they're having employment problems, financial problems, there's people in the meeting with so many backgrounds of training that you can probably put together a clearness committee of 4 or 5 people who are experts in any particular facet of human experience, or they know people that can be friends of the group who can be brought in. So there's a luxury, I would say, supply of advice that's not forced on people, but can be tapped. And there's a lot of morale building and actual practical advice available. I, of course, sometimes make the statement that I expect a bill of $50,000 from the meeting, because I've been, over a period of 50 years, my personal health, has been kept good as much by the meeting as anything I know. And if I had gotten that health improvement by going to professionals in the health field, they would have sent me a bill over the years, 50 years, of at least 50,000. It would have accumulated to 50,000. But the meeting does this all for free.
There's a tradition of sharing or trading labor, bartering.
Yeah, right,
Some too.
right. Yeah, the meeting at times has listed all the things services people can offer. You can have your hair cut, you can have your house painted, as you say, by exchanging.
Well, that I wasn't familiar with, but
Yeah, well, at one time we did it. It's these things get done, and then they get filed, and then a new population comes into the meeting, and they forget that was ever done, and then reinvent it. I like the fact that we do things, but we don't put it in concrete, so to speak, so that everybody that comes to the meeting house from then on has to do that routine that same way. Things can just lapse. Yeah, you're right. We have a lot of sharing. For instance, just a little thing, driving to Friends General Conference last summer. I drove over to meet some Milwaukee friends, and then we parked my car in a yard at Milwaukee, in the outskirts of Milwaukee, and rode in another friend's car. It took us 2 days to get to St. Lawrence University on the other side of the lakes, and you get to know people. We got to singing songs and telling stories. I actually didn't know that two of those friends were so much fun.
I'm fascinated by this idea of sharing work. Tell me more about how that would work. Sharing services would work.
Well, I remember, I think it's when the Boardmans, when the kids were growing up, and Eugene would be traveling to China or someplace, and people would go in and have a work bee with Betty Boardman and help with the chores of the house. And of course, when a baby's about to be born, then children are farmed out into families in the meeting. And when Agnes and I moved from the Center Avenue house down to the Riverside Drive house in 1954, Grace and Merritt Hughes drove up. We were painting the house before we moved into the Riverside house. Drove up, and they had a casserole for us.
Yeah.
People help each other. I'm not a great violin teacher, but I have taught children when they asked for it for periods of several months in different friends' homes. So that's an example. There must be quite a list of things that people do, and I've often had the idea that we should have visitation in the homes at bedtime. I can just see, if we really got to it, that 2 or 3 adults might turn up at a home before the young children are about to go to bed, and have a little meeting, reading a story of some significance, and then I think that's something that we could become aunts and uncles to a lot of kids in this meeting if we just do that a little extra thing at the invitation of the parents, of course. But if that got to be a habit, then that would be another way that we'd all be sort of knit together. There's no limit.
Well, there are powerful forces wishing to unknit us.
Oh, sure there are. The powerful forces that say each of us is a taxable individual, responsible for our own behavior. And yeah, there's...
And that we should, and that say that we should go out and be professional for all of our
Oh yeah, that's right, that's right. Yeah.
You said that at one time there was some structure given to the notion of bartering in the
Yeah, I remember that we went, it took, this must have been more than 10 years ago, I suppose. There was a committee formed of people that were quite interested in just what you're talking about, exchange or bartering, exchange of labor. And so they made up this table. And you signed up. I can make portraits with photography, and I said I can take a picture of you, and then I can put a sheet of transparent mylar over that, and with India ink. I loved a quill pen, and I can make an ink line portrait of you or of your house. We put down everything we thought we'd like to do for people, and a certain amount of that happened. Well, we still have work days here at the meeting. That's the part that hasn't been laid down. We still do that. Come to the meeting house and do chores. So it's still that kind of a community. Bartering, well, labor.
labor tithing.
Labor tithing, right. Right.
So you spoke of your early interest in French and languages, and your later interest in geography and soil science.
Yeah.
But I've never heard stories about how the violin and
Now that's really interesting. You see, coming from a Quaker tradition, at Earlham College, the violin would not be allowed on the campus legally until 1885 or something like that.
wow.
So music was slow to be allowed. People, so back in the Earlham Academy, which was preceded the college at Richmond, Indiana, was founded in 1847, and certainly. And in that kind of a dormitory situation, if a girl was heard humming or whistling, she had a punishment of some kind. So you can see the extent to which the puritanical resistance to appreciation of music and art, and Shakespeare wasn't allowed. Well, there's a lot of stuff in Shakespeare that's pretty ugly and young people shouldn't know about. But then that relaxed. So I grew up in a home where my mother, who was from a family in which music was permitted, which was a brave thing, she wanted her boys to have music, like same as anybody else in the city of Richmond. So we had piano, my brother and I had piano, and then we had violin, and then we were in the school orchestra, a wonderful school orchestra, symphony orchestra, in the public school. We didn't go to Quaker boarding schools. Father kind of insisted on that for financial reasons, but also because he thought we had good schools, and he thought that he and Mother could tutor us as much as we needed in doing our classroom preparation at home. So, because of that orchestra experience in high school, and then at Earlham College, I just kept on. I never did stop playing. And then I used it in soils classes. I figured anything that I'd done, anything that I enjoyed, I could drag into the soils classes. And so I'd introduce the soil classes and the geography classes in French, German, and English, first thing. So I just wanted to demonstrate this is an international topic that's being addressed at campuses all over the world. And then I got to bringing in the violins. See, the first time I had two violins. I've got an Italian one and probably an American one. I don't know, it doesn't have any pedigree. And I played an arpeggio on each one. I said, which is the better violin? Most of them voted for the crummier violin, the less valuable violin. I said, listen again. And then I said, you have to have training to really understand violin quality. Same way with soils. It takes training to know one soil from another and know what each soil can do. And that's what this course is about. about. Anyhow. I think people like to see instructors who have holistic approaches, and that their academic activity is a part of a whole person, not something that they could put on tape and just not even be there. And so the violin has meant a lot to me, and I took lessons when I was teaching at Westtown. I went every Saturday 1 year, paid $10 a lesson, which would be like $130 or $150 now per lesson, from Emanuel Zetlin, who was a concert violinist, who was willing to take me on. So I didn't buy a Model A Ford, I bought a violin. It cost $200, which is and if I'd bought a Model A Ford, it wouldn't be around anymore, but this violin's still around. It's the Italian violin.
How old is it?
It's 200 years old. 1767, something like that. It was a damaged one, so I could afford it. Been repaired. So the Quaker tradition of avoiding music, because it is a divertissement, it diverts you from the true spiritual life, that prejudice has been broken in the part of Quakerism I grew up in. I think Johann Sebastian Bach has a lot to say to us about the religious life, the spiritual life. I play a lot of Bach.
What other Quaker traditions have gone by the wayside during your affiliation with the faith?
Well, it's okay to folk dances. There's a great culture in the body. The body movement. The body is an instrument. It's all right to, as the Shakers themselves showed, and they're an offshoot of Quakerism. You can dance in your spiritual path, along your spiritual path, and your community can dance together. So, and you can study and you can act out Shakespeare.
So it's relatively recently, I think, that the loosening of the Puritan grip has actually been accomplished. I seem to remember stories told by Chris Boardman about a certain rigidity at Scattergood around the subject of music.
I imagine. Right, it's been improving, but then you have to, retreat maybe, and not do all those things. If you're going to have a life that's not just spread too thin, maybe you can't be all those things. You can't be a musician and an actor and a dancer and also a practitioner of silent worship on the basis of silence. It's good to have the freedom to be an artist, but don't be a burnout. Don't try to be too much.
At the Madison meeting, it seems to me, was even before the 60s and the sort of cultural explosion was fairly free.
Yeah, I think we were.
I think you were a force in that.
We had, the violin. I brought the violin to first day school, and then people like Bettina Orsic, a professional singer, and pianist, the elders, and the Boardmans coming from Congregational Church. I think it was what both of them were. Hymn singing was okay.
There was a period when Friends sang. There were hymnals.
Yeah.
At meeting. Sometimes there was singing.
Yeah.
was in the 50s, as I recall.
Yeah. So this meeting was a relaxed meeting in that regard. I think we've been, as a meeting, not interested in alcoholic beverages and cigarettes and tobacco. I think we haven't felt that that was a mistake to fast from those as a principle.
I've drawn blanks.
Should we stop for a moment?
Yep. There were early friends, a lot of them didn't have, George Fox himself, he didn't have to work for a living. I don't know just how, but he had money. And of course, once he got going, friends would give him hospitality and whatnot. And of course, he married Margaret Fell, who was widow of a judge and had an estate. And of course, the estate was taken away from Margaret Fell. She was thrown in prison for being a nonconformist, not going to the state church, not paying tithes and all that. But
What was the attitude of the 19th century American Quakers about reaching out and establishing new meetings?
oh, well, in the early 1800s, there were men and women traveling all over large areas. Well, to Europe even, England, Europe, and so forth. There were traveling ministers who would go to their monthly meetings. For example, if two women could come from the women's monthly meeting for business, which was being held behind a partition, so that women could get training in doing all their business without men interfering all the time. Two women could come in and sit down. And the clerk of the men's meeting, where the final decisions were made, would say, "And what is your mission?" And a companion would stand up, one of the women would stand up and say, "I'm a companion to Florence Smith here, who has a concern." And sit down, and Florence, after some silence, would stand up and say, "I've been trying to resist coming here to ask permission to travel in the ministry over this region, but I keep getting the call from God. I just keep getting it, and I just can't say no to it. So I'm just asking if you will unite with me and give me a letter of authority to do this as I go from meeting to meeting." And then they would discuss it, and they might write in that meeting, say, "I unite. I feel comfortable with that. I think Florence Smith should follow her leading," and so on. I'm happy to hear that she'll undertake this arduous work and leave her family. Is your family agreeable to that and all that? There was a lot of that traveling ministry, and I think we need it. Of course, the right people have to do it. It can't be people who are doing it for egotistical reasons of some kind, but people who really are what we call seasoned friends. And nobody likes to have categories like that, but you have to have some way of saying that this person is ready for this, and this person we want to send them. I think we ought to have that. I think we missed that. We have missed that network.
Did you personally, or did the Madison meeting have any direct experience with traveling ministers or folks serving in that capacity?
Well, yes, there was Leslie Schaefer. Leslie Schaefer was from the the Wider Quaker Fellowship and the Friends World Committee. There were people who came from the Friends World Committee and the Wider Quaker Fellowship through meeting, and from Friends General Conference. Bernard Walton. Bernard Walton was I hate to use the word saint because I don't want any halo put on any member of the Society of Friends. But he was a lovely person in his 60s and 70s who came out of the Friends General Conference and was a traveling minister. When he came to Madison more than once, he said, I want to see your directory. And he went to every friend's home in that directory. He said, I just want to do that.
And what would he do?
Sit and talk a little bit, and if they invited him to a meal, sure. But he just wanted to bring. He was a happy person, like the Dalai Lama who came here. He just radiated happiness. And that, so now that you mention that, he is an outstanding traveling minister.
What year was that?
Oh my goodness, I suppose we're talking about the 50s, probably, maybe even to the into the 60s. Then he got too feeble. He's no longer living. Then we had people like Dorothy Ackerman, who were appointed by the yearly meeting to be a traveling minister. We've had people before that. Dick Eastman. Dick Eastman was traveling minister in this area, perhaps from Illinois yearly meeting, probably. And there was a wonderful man by the name of Rose. It wasn't Philip Rose. I forget his. These people would work for a number of years, and sometimes they'd burn out on it. That is, they'd say, "Well, I just can't do that anymore." I mean, it drains you spiritually after a while. So a person does it as a person is led to do it, and a person retires from that when it's no longer physically and spiritually possible. But somehow we should do it more, and I think we ought to be. Well, first of all, we ought to be encouraging meetings which are struggling to start. I suppose that's a bit more important than saying we want to go out and start a meeting. We, in order to strengthen our meeting, when we lived over, we're talking about the late 50s, lived over in Prospect in the meeting house over there, to try to strengthen our meeting, we invited George Watson, professor of political science at Roosevelt University in Chicago, to come up and give a public lecture on William Penn. And he did. He came up, and it was advertised in the papers. And I think 20 of us from the meeting turned out, and 2 new people came from the city. It just looked like this is a very busy city. There's lectures going on all the time, and with the programs at the various theaters and centers, it's hard to. In another way, it seems to me the small meetings for worship, like the midweek meetings for worship we're finding on fourth day or Wednesdays, those small groups make indelible impressions on people. Well, anyhow, so traveling ministry, 2 small groups, such as Kathy Stan White and I experienced going up to Manitowoc, Green Bay, and Rhinelander. Those people were just so happy to see us. It's a royal welcome. You kind of feel like you're getting the better part of the experience, to be so welcomed and given so much good hospitality. But we certainly need that knitting, that weaving together of the meetings. And in the process, meeting people who hear about that we care that much. We care that much about little groups. We're not a big group. Raising money to build another church, and we have a very low budget. We don't have any staff. We have paid staff, but we care. And that's pretty important to have traveling people, make connections.
Any thoughts about future of Society of Friends or Madison?
Well, I think the
Meeting?
Madison meeting is getting too big. I was just reading some of the minutes, and we said whenever it gets up to 50, don't let it get any bigger. So I think that we ought to somehow we ought to figure out what is God's will here. That's all I'm going to say, because it's very easy to lay out a blueprint and horrify a lot of people by the blueprint. It has to be discovered. If we have to have smallness, we have to have. My family, as I was growing up, went to 8th Street Friends Church in Richmond, Indiana. And then the East Main Street Friends Church, which was a mile farther east, wanted to tear down its building and put up a bigger building which could serve as Indiana Yearly meeting place, but it didn't see where it was going to get the money. Then somebody had the bright idea, we'll take the 8th Street Friends and join them to us, and we'll have almost 1,000 members. We'll have a lot more money. And that's what happened. And I asked my father, what about that? Well, he was a man who would keep quiet when there was something brewing that could cause an awful lot of friction. He could see that it was inevitable with the mood of the community that was going to happen. But he shook his head. He says there'll be one half as many clerks. There'll be one half as many committees. The responsibility will just not be there for as many people. The smaller group is the group where you have real growth. But he couldn't. So that meeting was bought by the Elks Country Club, or by the Elks, and turned into a lodge building, and we all went over to the beautiful new Friends Meeting House. Very good architecture. The bigger meeting, a mile farther east. So, well, I mean that principle of staying small, I think, is particularly important in the unprogrammed meetings.
You've never, aside from the experience with the East Side meeting here in Madison, you've never really experienced a separation or a cleaving
Well,
meeting.
I don't know. Whenever there is a separation, some people feel, between the 11 o'clock meeting and the 9 o'clock meeting right here in the same building, that they begin to get different character. And some people choose, maybe a few people choose, in such instances, to say, well, we're not all one. They don't. That was exactly how many people in the meeting, a number of people, I won't say, in the meeting felt uncomfortable about the Yahara meeting. We don't see you. Well, I would say it's like a strawberry plant. Do you want the strawberry plant not to send out a runner and start another I mean, you don't want that to happen. You don't want your children to grow up and go away and maybe marry somebody and have enough. If you're going to have growth, you're going to have it. So this is kind of bothers me that people are not able to handle this feeling of separation as a wholesome thing. I just can't see how they can, because otherwise then you see it keeps getting bigger and you lose the intimacy and the still small voice that we talk about, the divine presence or the spiritual presence. gets less of a chance. When we go to Friends General Conference and where there are 2,000 of us at a meeting for worship, and they've got these microphones standing around, and we go up to the microphone and we speak. We can do that because we've been trained in little meetings. I don't think we could have been trained from the beginning in a group of 2,000. So it was the Yahara meeting was a good experience. I thought, though, there were some people that felt it was a pity because we weren't all together at the meetings for worship. But you can't be all together if you're growing. It would be easier to start another meeting if we were going to start at the same time a center for having meals for the homeless. If there were a project, it could be. I could see people say, well, I don't quite feel like separating from this meeting, but you know, if there's a project, maybe we'll rent a building over there, and we'll just worship over there too. It's really interesting that in England, in the early part of this century, I think it was, in the latter part of the last century, the Friends meetings held Bible schools for non-friends, and they were so successful that the question was, can't we just call these Friends meetings? I don't understand it all, but they didn't. They felt like, well, that's a mission work for outsiders we're doing, and it seems to me like there was a strange kind of a cleavage between the people that were making such a success of these Bible schools and the people that came to them who were so grateful.
I sense in the society at large, and you've touched on this, it certainly is true, it captures my experience with the spirituality, that there is a large tradition of people that consider themselves atheists that are in fact more seekers than atheists.
Sure.
And that there's a starving, you've mentioned this a couple times,
Mm-hmm.
there's a starving for spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of creates, especially as a new and very enthusiastic friend, this creates kind of
A challenge?
a dilemma in me
But-
because I don't know how to approach, I have this enthusiasm for Quakerism and how to go about, I don't think of myself as a minister or a proselytizer for Quakerism, but I do feel that there's a place for Quakerism for these seekers.
Right, I do too. That's one reason. I think it's just, I have this part of me says, why aren't we getting out there? That's what the early friends felt they had a message, and they went all over the world. Went to Turkey, they went to see the Pope in Rome, and George Fox came to the colonies, and some Protestant minister said to him, well, you know, those savages, they don't have a soul. He says, how'd you say? And then he had an Indian come over, and he had a translator say, through the translator, he said, when you do something wrong, is there something in you that tells you that was something wrong, and you want to do something about that? And the Indian said, yes. So George Fox said, see, every human being has this God in them. And I just think that the Friends still have a message, a tremendous message, that you don't need a paid staff to do your religious talking for you, and you don't need a divertissement. You don't need entertainment to distract you from the growth of the spirit that you were born with. And it can be real simple. You can just sit down. Absolutely simple. I think that message is needed. But we're not going around talking with fervor. The Jehovah's Witnesses come to my house, and they sure get a welcome, and I'm buying their literature like crazy. And they have fervor, but they're trying to tell me that they have the only explanation, and it's all in the Bible, literally. Our message would be, I think as friends, did you realize you've got the whole thing in you right now, but you don't know what it's going to do next? You haven't followed its growth. I'm not telling you something, except I just want you to know what you've got. I just want you to know how empowered you are. And if we need several of us to sit down together, or our power does not blossom and grow like it should. So I'm in a sense asking you to join me. I think that's a powerful message.
So what do the Jehovah's Witnesses say when you tell them that?
Well, I can't get anywhere with them because they have all the truth. So I just say, I love your spirit. They want to engage me in discussion. The woman says, you're always so busy rushing off to, where did you go, Quaker Meeting House? And you buy my literature, but I want to be able to talk with you, discuss these things. I said, the main thing I get from you is your fine spirit. That's what I like. And I don't want to get any farther. I don't need to get any farther as far as I'm concerned. Because I can't possibly agree. I can't be happy with their explanation because I'm not worshiping explanations. I want to worship the Spirit. I want the Spirit to grow. That's all I need. I don't even need the Bible. And then they suddenly, they'd say, whew, we've got to save that guy.
Uh-oh. You ever invite them to a meeting?
No, I haven't. I've just felt that they are happy where they are, and they're doing a great job. Blessings on them. They brought one of their leaders to meet me. I think they want me to go and join the staff. As an older person, I might just lend a certain quality that they would. I don't think they're interested in attending the meeting. But maybe I should ask them, huh? But I do think we have quite a message, but I don't find, like you, I don't find myself going out and proselytizing. I tend to be live and let live and not bother people who are hungry. So in a sense, it isn't fair. And also, they could help me. They could help me be nourished because it takes several people with the light within sitting down together, and I can't do it alone. Wow, if I got up after a Catholic service or after a Methodist service and said what I've just said, some people would say, kind of sweet, wasn't he? He's kind of sweet. But some people might say, whoo, I want to try that. A few people might say, whoo, I want to try that. But I'm not going there and talking.
The other thing I've found since I started to look at myself as a religious person is that religious is one of the things like sex and money that people don't talk about in the day-to-day, work-a-day world.
Let's stop for a minute. What was it that this member of meeting?
Well, one member of the meeting, in writing up, we have states of society. In states of society, statements every year or sometimes twice a year about the spiritual state of the society and other features of our meeting would be written by an individual. I remember one of them there in the minutes they are. One of them said, we have a very fortunate kind of a religious fellowship. We have a unity, unification. We are united, but that doesn't mean that we think alike. It means we're united in trust of each other and in believing in each other, believing in the quality of seeking and finding and growth. That's the kind of unity we have, which allows for diversity. That's a really precious relationship.